Hey everyone, welcome back to another live stream here on the channel. Nick here, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Looking forward to another stream tonight and really looking forward to getting stuck into some of your questions. As always, we'll give it a couple of minutes just to let a few people join. Had some really exciting times last week on the stream, hit a peak record of most number of people for the channel jumping in the stream and getting involved. And then also broke the record for the channel average across the entire stream. We ended up going for about 90 minutes last week. So we'll just see how we go tonight, whether we go the same length or whether we go a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. Doesn't really matter. We'll just see who jumps in and asks their questions. And something I did want to talk about tonight is a bit of an exciting announcement for the channel. So I referred to it a few times just for the people who might have missed the beginning here while we're talking about it, and as they sort of come in, I'll come back to it a few times. But really, the big announcement for the channel, and what you'll notice is, and I might just share my screen very quickly over to what you guys will be looking at. So this is the screen that you'll be seeing from your end if you're on a laptop. A few buttons here that are slightly different, but you'll notice a couple of changes to how it looks on the live stream here tonight. And like I said, I'll come back to this a few times, but what you'll notice is there's this new button. It says join just underneath where the thumbs up video or the thumbs up video button is. If I click that, we like it. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit the share button as well. But you'll see this join button, and what we've created here on the channel is what we call Team NJ Sports Science. Just a little way of being able to support the channel. I've had a few people send in some messages and get in contact and want to know how they can support the channel in more ways other than just subscribing, commenting, and jumping in the live streams. They've been getting plenty of value in and feel like they want to contribute a little bit more. And apologies if you're seeing a little bit of, just realized, of a screen showing a screen, showing a screen, showing a screen. That's what it's going to be a little bit. But hitting this join button down the bottom here that I'm circling really is enabling you to join up as a member to the channel. If you click it, you'll pop up a little screen like this, and just for $2.99 Australian, so less than what you would pay for one coffee a month, you can be part of Team NJ Sports Science and really help continue to support the channel to grow. So all the proceeds from it allows me to keep most of the content, or all of the content, as free as possible for you. Limit the number of ads we can have on content as well. Keeps the channel running in terms of buying equipment and being able to set up these live streams, also to cover a little bit of the cost that, and hopefully if we get enough members involved with Team NJ Sports Science, it gives me a little bit more freedom to take some time away from my normal job to be able to spend more time with you guys answering your questions as well. So like I said, for the price or less than the price of one coffee a month, you think about how many you might buy each month. For less than that a month, you can be part of the team. You get one of these cool loyalty badges as well. And if you actually have a look over in the chat, we've got our first member, and you get a big old little shout out at the top. You can see at the top here, Aaron's our first member. He's got a cool little symbol next to his name showing that he is one of our channel members. So it does stand out as well to me to answer your questions, particularly when we have quite a few coming through. And last week was a great example. We have question after question after question. Really easy for me to look over and highlight who some of our members are, and obviously prioritize your questions as well. So if you're interested in jumping on board, by no means is it going to change anything in terms of the number of videos I make a week or anything like that. It's not going to limit what videos you can have access to. You're still going to have access to everything, but it is just a way of, one, supporting the channel. And there are a few things I've got lined up as we build members on the channel that we're going to do a bit more dedicated work for those who are wanting to support the channel and willing to sort of jump on board and keep helping us grow this community, but also keep supporting my ability to be able to make these videos and do these live streams as well. So really appreciate anyone who's keen to jump on the member side of things there. As I said, just hit the join button underneath the video, and that'll get you all involved. Less than a coffee a month. It's sort of a no-brainer for the type of stuff we're able to do in here. Welcome to the guys who are already in. Will, welcome. Aaron, welcome. Thank you for joining up as a member. Give you another shout out as there. Thank you for being number one. Only just launched it this afternoon, so feel free to jump on and support as best we can. Like I said, once we hit some certain benchmarks of numbers of members, we'll start doing some member exclusive stuff. Is something I'm looking forward to. Got a few things in the works, so jump on if you can. If you're just interested in some of the free content and jumping in these live streams, that is perfectly fine as well. Keep supporting the channel by hitting the subscribe button and sharing with people you think might be interested. Let's get stuck into the questions now. We've got a few people in here, and we'll get things kicking off for tonight. So leave your questions in the chat. This first one, a little bit unrelated. to endurance, but we'll bring it up and get things started. We'll ask here, is Trump doping to win the election race? I don't think he's doping, but I think there's plenty going on in terms of what might be happening behind the scenes. I think he held a press conference just before, pretty early in the morning US time, saying that he basically won the election. I don't know, it was interesting. I was there last time we had the Americans had an election in 2016. I was there for it in a very democratic town of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the rest of Michigan went Republican that year. And it was kind of an interesting thing to be walking down a street that was basically dead empty the next morning. I think it was like a Wednesday morning or a Thursday morning. Woke up, walked down the street to try and find the one good coffee place in town. And I was the only one there. There were internationals owning and running the shop, and I was the only one sitting there having a coffee before I went off to my internship at University of Michigan. So the type of thing, the election's going to have a big bearing on what happens over in the States, but also I think across the world. So is he doping? I don't know. He might be on something, but it'd be interesting to see how that sort of result goes. A little bit of a different start to our live stream tonight, but obviously a big issue from a world perspective at the moment. To be sort of considering, because it could have big implications for everyone else, maybe racing if you're considering. Obviously, a lot of triathletes who are interested in going over to Kona each year could have some interesting things go on with how does the COVID situation progress with some of his policy, etc. So it'd be interesting to see what happens and how that flows on into our endurance community. Does it impact our abilities to race in the future over the next 12, 18 months? Maybe not. Looking forward to seeing what does happen though, and hopefully get a bit more clarity around the world globally on things like racing, and we can get that back underway as COVID starts to get a little bit more under control. Getting stuck into our endurance questions tonight though, we've got our first one from our first member of the team on here at Team NJ Sports Science. You've talked before about having your gait analysed, so we're talking about running. What sort of changes did you have to make, and what are common issues you see with athletes? This is a really good one. I definitely am an advocate for having your running technique assessed. And when we talk about running gaits, that's just the cycle. So gait cycle is effectively the fancy biomechanical term and the scientific term for running technique. Really, the big thing for me in terms of understanding technique is it's going to improve a couple of things. It's going to improve our resistance to injury fundamentally. You run in a really awkward way, that's going to cause you to potentially put yourself at higher risk of injury. In terms of economy, we're losing out in terms of how economical we are. We're putting out the same amount of work, same oxygen consumption, but we're running slow as a result of poor technique. Any sort of niggles and things like that also fall on the injury side of things. You can gain a bit of time also through the economy. So there's plenty of benefits to it. I guess in terms of where a lot of athletes go wrong, the really common ones, and I've picked all of this up from Paul McKinnon, the Balanced Runner. Go check him out on Instagram at The Balanced Runner. It's all lowercase, all in one go. He's unbelievable in terms of technique. If you're around the world watching or you're not in Melbourne, he does online stuff anyway. He's been doing that throughout COVID as well, doing a video call with you and assessing your technique via the internet. It's a pretty cool setup he's got. But his process is quite simple in terms of understanding what happens at the top dictates what happens down low. And I think that's where a lot of athletes get it the wrong way around. And some of the common issues we're talking about here are often to hear things about, pick up your cadence. Everyone has to run at a cadence of 185 steps per minute, things like that. A lot of the time, that's not where some of the issues are. If you look at a lot of runners, it's mostly to do with what their arms are doing. The body works in this interesting interconnected way where if the arms are low, and I'll give some examples of me, I had a lot of issues in terms of some lower back pain at times, some shoulder pain while I was running. After I've seen Paul and done some work, go out, what did we focus on? We focused on what was happening up top. And before I even thought about it, I went, well, why would I focus up top when running is all about lower body? Because what my arms were doing, instead of swinging through in a nice sort of comfortable position here, good bend in the elbow, so I'm taking pressure off the bicep, which then takes a little bit of pressure off the shoulder as well, and that has relieved my shoulder pain while I was running. Apart from it being a little bit more relaxed, what it was doing is getting me a little bit more consistent. So I was actually finding before that, my arms were quite low. My left arm was actually making this kind of circle as a I guess, just a natural habit. So by making this circle here, that actually threw my hip out a bit as well. Tilted forward, I had this rocking and rolling thing through my hips. It wasn't really leading to much economical movement or efficient movement at all. It was actually quite interesting to see how much I was doing incorrectly. fixed up just what the arms were doing, relaxed a little bit through the torso, it opened up my breathing a bit more, and bang, we're away. It kind of readjusted and fixed everything that was happening from the hips down just by consolidating what was happening up top. A different thing to look at, but we often get caught in what is happening from the legs and what, like knee drive and pulling, getting your knee through nice and aggressively, or stepping over like that hurdle type shape and that cyclic movement. A lot of that's happening from the arms. The arms are what are generating a lot of the lift. That's giving us the momentum to then leverage off to get up off the ground. That's what's keeping us nice and stable up top, so we're not rocking and rolling in the torso here and moving too much, which is then causing the hips to rotate as well. Everything does kind of set itself up from the top, what's happening through your upper body. You'd be surprised how quickly it then changes things at the lower end rather than trying to think bottom up. It's much easier to control something at the top. So from all of those aspects, I think there's some of the I guess the downsides, the downsides of some of the traditional things we hear around, well, what some of the stakes athletes make is looking at lower body first rather than the upper body. And I definitely think it's worthwhile, like I said, because it's going to prevent a lot more from an injury perspective than what it's going to cause. If you get your technique right, sets a really good foundation. And we follow that same principle when we talk about gym. And I did a video on it last week talking about the processes and building just good movement patterns is going to make you a lot stronger athlete anyway. And it's going to make you more resilient to injury compared to if you just try and get, if you have a poor squat technique and you try and lift heavy weight, that's going to put you at more risk. Versus if you have a lower weight lifted, but you've got a really sound, solid technique, that's going to be better off for you long term. Same with running technique. Same with why I advocate for a good quality bike fit as well for our cyclists and triathletes out there. Good quality bike fit is going to get you in a much more comfortable position and allow you to generate more power as well. So a few sort of on the back of the question there. Recently bought a Ticker X, which gives you running dynamics. Are these values enough to make changes if you've got a general idea of good form? I think it's an interesting aspect. I haven't personally. I deliberately didn't get a Ticker X. Is probably the better way to put it. When I bought a Ticker, I just got the standard one because I was mainly looking at heart rate, and that decision more came out of, am I actually going to use the running dynamics data? And for me, I wasn't even going to consider it and look at it because it's not something that I think it's going to revolutionize my performance by looking at that data. Is it going to inform me? Yes, it probably does. But is it going to give me information that's going to completely change how I'm perceiving my performance and actually completely give me a new avenue to improve? Probably not so much. So that's why I moved away from it. A lot of athletes will look at it, particularly if you're looking at things like vertical oscillation. You don't want too much of that vertical movement. Obviously, you don't want to be like jumping up. We want that nice sort of like balance between vertical force allowing us to get up straight off the ground in a vertical way, but then also propel us forward in the horizontal. So some of those numbers can be useful for tracking that, particularly like you said, if you've got a general idea of good form, that's going to put you in a nice position to understand some of those dynamics. But it also can throw you off completely if you don't have that sound good form to begin with, and there are some errors that you're unaware of, particularly like me, like I said, that arm movement on the left arm, that type of thing. If you're unaware of it, those running dynamics as numbers aren't really going to tell us a lot, because you think you're basing it on a good form, but you're not actually. So you're kind of misleading yourself. I'd much prefer someone, if we're talking about technique changes, it's much easier for someone to look at you or to film yourself and then rewatch it back. And the visual side of things is almost everything, rather than what a metric might be telling you based on the accelerometry. And even then, the main purpose of the heart rate straps is for heart rate. I question a bit. I'm sure it's reasonable, but as with any technology, I always question the accuracy of it and the worthwhile nature of it as well. Is it actually telling us what we want to be knowing? You're mentioning here your left arm's a little bit wild too, so a lot of people sort of find that. I carry my phone when I run, which is probably not a good I guess probably not a good habit to get myself into. Feel like I'm okay running up to threshold, but after that I feel a bit awkward and too upright. Practicing the high intensity speeds and those faster speeds are obviously something that you need to do. The more you practice going fast, the better you get at it at the end of the day. I almost find it's harder to run slow at times, but once you set that good technique, having done that work where I'm in this rhythm, all I have to do if I want to go faster is change how quickly I swing my arms now. And that's enough for me to trigger into that rhythm and get moving. I also change the amount of arm swing I have. If I'm sprinting, I'm going to have a much bigger, throw the elbow back a lot further and bring it forward a little bit higher. When I'm just cruising along, I just try and get to my thumbs to my chin is all I'm trying to think of. That was the cue that Paul gave me. So really you can then, it's similar in the pool. You should be able to just use that same technique and speed up and slow down as you need to. And a little trigger like that and having that consistency across a number of speeds is what's going to build that economy and better, better performance overall. So something to consider. Caleb jumping in here with my cadence is nowhere near 180. I don't think a lot of people's cadence is. And this is one of those, I guess, a lot of people talk about this 180 or 185 cadence, but is it actually a worthwhile thing? Probably not. We've got all different components to our running. Some of us are a lot taller, so we're going to have a lot longer strides, and so having a naturally longer stride is going to mean our cadence is going to be a little bit lower as well. Being a bit shorter and having a little bit shorter stride, you're probably going to have that higher cadence. So automatically, we've got a very easy way of identifying who might have a faster or slower cadence. If we try and apply a blanket rule across everyone, you're going to end up into trouble. I could end up running at a way too high cadence or having to speed up even further, and it's unnatural, and then I might be burning myself out from overspinning. Same with the bike. You try and spin at 110 when you're comfortable sitting at 90. Some guys can sit at 110 or girls can sit at 110, sure, but if that doesn't work for you in terms of your ability to produce those more rapid contractions, you're going to blow yourself up just by spinning too fast and also being not the ideal scenario for you in terms of that optimal. So it's the type of thing that working through some of that, like with what we do with heart rate, the generic equations aren't always going to fit like a whole bunch of people. People are going to be left, right, and center when we talk about some of those generic equations to base things off. 220 minus your age will fit a good portion of the population, but the other portion is going to be left in the dark, basically, and sort of left up to trying to work it out from themselves and be basing their numbers off things that are slightly incorrect. Caleb's put here, cadence stays the same. I'm assuming that you're talking about your own running here. Cadence stays the same for all run speeds plus or minus 2 strides, which is an interesting thing as well. It's like as we go, like what is happening from a cadence perspective? Like, do we necessarily need to increase our cadence to run faster? Potentially not. If you're taking a longer stride as you go faster, you could have the same cadence and be just going as just as quick. We've got to find out what is economical for you, particularly based on some of those biological differences like limb length and how tall you are and the amount of force you're producing into the ground to get that stride. All of these things come into it. So the cadence aspect I think is interesting, but is it the number one thing I'm looking at? Probably not. It's making sure that we are bulletproof against injury or resilient to injury because we have a good technique to begin with, and we're looking at the right things to make us more economical and allow us to have a very consistent approach regardless of the speed we're running at. If cadence picks up as a result of that process, if you work through that improved technique and you get a bit of an increase in your running cadence, cool. If it drops your cadence a bit, that's also cool as well. If it's being efficient and effective for you, that's really the end result. And if it's delivering on what we're aiming for in terms of the injury side of things, perfect. That's really what we're looking at. So great question, guys. I know I've gone a little bit long there, but I think we covered a couple of questions within that around cadence and the running technique. Definitely something I recommend. And if you are going to get in touch with anyone, Paul McKinnon, the Balance Runner, is the guy to go see for our run technique stuff. I'm actually trying to book in a session with him myself in the next couple of weeks to get my stuff looked at again. Also, just as a bit of a catch up. But anyone who's based in Melbourne, get in touch with him to go see him in person. If you can't see him in person, get in contact with him anyway because he's doing a lot of online work. He works with guys in Canada and Vancouver I've seen before, Europe, the UK, all around the world because he can do it. All he has to do is be able to see you running. So if you can set up your phone somewhere, get someone to hold it, that's going to give him all the information he needs to be able to start making some implementations because that's kind of what he's doing in person as well. So keep the questions coming through, guys. Great start to the stream tonight. I know we've got quite a few more people jumping in now, so I'm going to revisit. If some of you missed it at the beginning, I was talking about a new exciting announcement for the channel here. You'll see if I head back across to my screen share, you'll see, apologies for the picture that's going to be coming up soon, but you'll see the join button down below. It should be down below about here somewhere. If you click on the join button, that is a new feature to the channel. It allows you to join Team NJ Sports Science for less than a coffee a month. All it does is help support the channel, keep things growing. We are going to be building a bit of a membership here, and the guys and girls who are jumping on the team and supporting the channel in that way, there'll be some things coming your way in the not too distant future that are going to be exclusive to members, but then also being able to be seen in the chat. You would have noticed here on the on the right hand side in chat, I'm circling at the moment. A little badge comes up when you are a member, and depending on how long you've been a member for, it actually changes. You'll notice on the join page here, we've got green, pink, yellow, red, purple, and blue. As you progress through number of months, I think it's 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, and 24 months. As you progress through, you get a different colored badge, so we know where you are, how long you've been supporting the channel, and it's easily identifiable in the chat. And you can see here, it stands out like a sore thumb. So it's really easy for me to see your question when you do send it through. So definitely recommend jumping on if you want to support the channel. Really do appreciate it. By no means is it going to change anything about how we go about this channel and creating content, but it is the type of thing that you will eventually be able to access a few little bonuses as being a part of the team there. So if you are interested in supporting the channel in any sort of way, would really appreciate you hitting that join button. Otherwise, if you're just more than happy jumping in, joining these live streams, jumping on the videos, leaving your comments and questions, hitting the share button to distribute to others, get involved and subscribe to the channel. All of these things are great ways to support the channel as well, and I really appreciate it. But just that sort of next level, if you're really keen, you feel like you're getting lots of value, again, less than a coffee a month goes a long way when we add up a few people. I think I did the rough numbers on it in terms of what it would be, and it doesn't take a lot of people to really help me support having some of these live streaming software, getting new equipment in terms of making some of these live streams a little bit more elaborate in terms of the quality, and also allowing me to spend the time in the week and be able to justify the time in the week to make as many videos as I can to answer as many questions and reach as many topics as possible throughout as well. We'll get stuck back into the questions because Caleb did send this through to me on Instagram. If you haven't jumped over there, head over to NJ at NJ_sportscience. Ask your questions directly outside of our live stream times, but brought it up about talking about the Stride foot pod, power for running rather than pace, and some interesting ideas around that. So Caleb's here. I know I brought it up earlier, but talking about the Stride foot pod again, other people might be interested. Is it more accurate in terms of pace? Our discussion was about what's better, GPS versus GPS watch, looking at minutes per K, for example, or minutes per mile if you're working off that metric, or using something like a foot pod that's going to be calculating power, which is independent of pace. And so it's just like an effort output like you would get on a bike, or then the calculated pace based on a foot pod. So really what we're looking at, the two fundamental differences here, if we leave power out of the equation for the moment, because the foot pod's calculating power, not quite like what happens on the bike. I might come to that in a second. In terms of the pace side of things, GPS watches effectively work on its global positioning system is what GPS stands for. So we've got a bunch of satellites in space. You turn your watch on, the watch connects to those satellites, and based on your position on the Earth, and as you change your position on the Earth over time, so change in displacement over time is effectively what we know as your pace, minutes per kilometer. So it knows that you started in point A, you went to point B, and over that time, it's going to calculate your average speed or average pace, because of where you are and how quickly it took you to get from point A to point B. The downside is with things like GPS watches, we can get some inaccurate reading with GPS watches because they're not super high, what we call frequency. So it hertz, HZ, if you ever see that in any of the specifications, is just number of samples per second. That's all it's reading. So something like 5 hertz is 5 samples per second. So that's 5, basically you can think about it very simply, 5 signals to the satellite every second. So that's reasonable. It's going to give us a good idea of where we are, but it's not going to be super accurate. The GPS units that sit in the back of your top, like you'd see football, soccer players, basketballers, team sport athletes wear, they can't look at their data live, but someone's on a laptop looking at it. Some of those sample up to 20 or 25 hertz per second. So you get much more signaling. That's much better to then look at those higher speeds and higher paces when people are sprinting, because they're moving over a short distance, but over a very, very quick period of time. So we need all those samples coming in to tell us their location in all of those stages and map it together. That would be that's the more accurate way. The more frequency, the higher frequency you can get in terms of that sampling rate, is going to give you the most accurate pace data. Where something like a foot pod is also, I guess, comparable in terms of understanding pace and can give us some consistency, is it's not relying on that. It's not relying on a sampling rate. It's just calculating it based on things like cadence and stride length and working out off that rhythmic style if you're running, what is that pace equivalent of, and using a different method of understanding, well, how are we covering ground in a certain period of time. Each of those are going to be comparable. Each of those are going to have their flaws. Both are going to have their error. So the GPS terms, you've got low frequency rate, which most GPS watches have to keep them portable, wrist-based, have the screen in there. You notice the GPS units that are really high sampling that sit in the back of your top for team sport athletes, they don't have a screen. They don't have any way of looking at how fast you're going on the spot. They just sit in the back because they're a slightly bigger unit, and that means they can fit in the required technology to be able to get that increased sampling rate. Whereas watches, they keep them small because it sits on your wrist. They also have all the technology for the screen in there. Something like I'm wearing an Apple Watch now, so it's got all the technology to hook up to my phone. All of these little things take away their ability to put in those higher hertz, those higher hertz signals, if you like. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where we'll get the really good quality stuff once they can shrink it down small enough. And that's like anything; everything progresses over time. And the stuff we have doesn't mean it's inaccurate. It's just going to be flawed in some aspects. Everyone would have seen at some point in time their GPS isn't working as effectively as what they know it should. They feel like they're running a lot quicker than what it's telling them, or they're running a lot slower than what it's telling them. That's part of the process. You get some interference, you get heavy cloud cover, things like that also make a difference in terms of picking up a signal. All of these things. FootPod, because it's a calculated measure, it's working off a different thing, is also going to have its flaws. I mean, if you change what was happening with your cadence, it's potentially going to change how it's and your stride length. It's potentially going to change how it's calculating what your pace is. It's a means to an end. Whatever you think is going to be good for you and be consistent, and you're going to be able to apply to session after session after session, is the way to go. What is your preference in terms of do you like to use a FootPod? Do you like to use GPS? They're going to be reasonably comparable, but as long as you stay consistent with that and you're not chopping and changing, is where I think that's where it's going to be most effective, regardless of the actual output. Is it accurate or not? To within the very fine details is a very minor part of the process. It's not necessarily it's not really the big portion. It's not the major thing we're looking at. In terms of coming back to the power side of things, talking about power. I know, Caleb, you mentioned you're not really going to be using it for power, but I think the power metric of a Stride FootPod is something interesting. If anyone knows anyone who works at Stride and can get one sent out to me so I can test, that'd be really great, because I probably don't have the money right now to be able to go out and just buy one. I probably wouldn't use it unless someone was giving it to me to test. But I think the power thing is the interesting thing for me, and talking to athletes and other coaches who've used it, I understand the logic behind it. Again, it's calculated power on a bike setup, and I'm looking at my time trial bike here. We have a strain gauge in those power meters, and the strain gauge is effectively what we would have on like a force plate in a biomechanics lab. So when you put force into the crank, into the pedal, into the spider, into the hub, wherever your power meter is located, bottom bracket, we're directly measuring that force output, and we're directly measuring what your power is going to be then, based on that strain gauge's pickup. In a Stride power meter, it doesn't have a strain gauge, so we're now looking at a calculation of power. So again, we're going to have a bit more error. But I think in terms of application, it's really interesting with how it compares. We've had some athletes use it on the treadmill before while we're doing their testing. Have a look at how fast they're running on the treadmill versus out on the road and what the power ratings are. We get similar comparisons. That gives us some good understanding of then what are equivalent intensities, particularly going up and down things like hills. Really interesting when you try to run up a hill. Obviously, pace isn't going to be the same because it's harder to run the same pace up a hill. Power can keep the physiological effort consistent, like you would on a bike. You might not be going as fast, but you're putting out the same amount of effort or exertion. So I think that's where the Stride power meter is really sort of effective, and that's where I think if you're going to use it, that would probably be the main use of it, rather than the pace side of things. But each to their own. If you want to try it as a metric, definitely sort of go ahead and have a look at it. We're going to get stuck in. I'll come back to your question in a sec. You asked a couple before. I'll get into Baker's question here. Imported my rides into a program, and it showed me totals for years so far. Horrified to see it only spent 1.5 hours in VO2 max, 85% in zone 1. And then the follow-up to that, no wonder I'm not getting any faster. Interesting you sort of say that. I mean, really, that largely comes down to, particularly if we're looking at, if you're like putting into Garmin Connect or having a look at any of those types of things, some of it can come down to what are the zones you've set in that software of what is defined as VO2 max. I see this a lot, particularly in my own data, because I get a little bit lazy at times in updating my zones in Garmin Connect. So then at the end of a VO2 type session, it tells me I've spent most of my time in in like a threshold zone when I've actually spent it in my genuine VO2 max. Like today, went and did some VO2 intervals at like 90%, 95% of VO2 max, and it actually told me I was in threshold, but I haven't updated my training zone, so that's where it's obviously going to skew the data. If you've kept them up to date, then it comes down to, well, what was your focus of training throughout the time? Maybe if your focus was heavily on base case and just trying to improve your just general endurance, particularly this year when we haven't had much racing and no events because of COVID, that's probably not unrealistic to say that there's probably not too much time up there. But if you had a deliberate effort to try and get faster and build your aerobic engine, now we're starting to be a little bit concerned around the type of thing where it's like, you just haven't spent enough time up there. 1.5 hours over the course of a whole year is very, very minimal. If those numbers were accurate in terms of training zones and defining those zones, 1.5 hours over the whole year is, definitely not enough stimulus to be able to see significant improvement. So maybe you just take that into your next block of training and go, all right, I'm going to have some clear focus on VO2 and see if it really accelerates some of that development. Push yourself up into those really high intensity intervals. 1-to-1 work to rest is good. 2 to 4 minutes on, equal very easy spinning recovery or easy walking recovery, whatever you're doing. 12 to 20 minutes of working time twice a week is a really good way to go about it. You can do things like 10 by 30 seconds, like flat out 110% of your VO2 max wattage, 30-second passive recovery. So just sitting there, obviously repeat that 10 times, have a couple of minutes rest, and then go back in, do one more set of it. So you're doing 20 efforts total in the session. Another really good one for VO2 max. Anything where you're just getting everything up to that top end 100% or close to in and around 95%, right through to 110%. You can do 15 on, 15 off. There's so many variations that you could do, but spend some time up there, and it's going to help to boost the top end of your engine. Absolutely, is going to be the key. So interesting finding you've got there with only that 1.5 hours, but double check that the zone definitions are accurate. Readjust if it hasn't changed and they are accurate. Well, maybe it is just a case of spending time up there, and it's good that you're now aware of that. Could be just a really easy way to improve that a little bit more in terms of performance. So I like where you're looking there in terms of understanding the breakdown of zones. I've just got your follow-up here in terms of what does the norm do a year, or is that too hard to work out? It's very individual. I'll bring it up on the screen. Very, very individualized as to how much VO2 work across a training year for person A is enough versus then person B, who might be training a very different set of, in a very different way or different sport, different type of event in that sport, long distance versus short distance. That is really going to be highly individualized. Like I'll give you an example. Like myself, I do all my umpiring training and football, basically team sport type training. I would spend more time, I'd almost arguably spend more time in zone 4 in training sessions. If I'm just looking at key training sessions throughout the week, spend more time in zone 4 than probably anything else, because I'm doing VO2. I spend a bucket load of time up there because that's very specific for the type of stuff I need to do. I'm not doing massive amounts of like the zone 1, zone 2 that you're describing you're doing, because that's just different. I don't need necessarily that much volume. I need the intensity to be able to keep up with the pace of the game and then have recovery and then go again. So I'm going to have a lot higher number than, say, an endurance or an ultra distance cyclist or ultra distance runner. It's specificity there. So hard to put a number on it. What would be okay? I'm more also concerned about blocks of time rather than a 12-month period. I mean, what you did in January is very unlikely to dictate what you did in even June, July. Yes, it's going to lay a foundation, but if you did like no VO2 in January and then you did heaps in June, July, like they're enough apart, and even like January versus December, like they're enough apart that there's so many things within that time period in between that could alter the outcome of where you're at. So it's difficult to then say between people what is too much or what is enough. Obviously, you can go a bit overkill. Like I wouldn't be like, I don't. When I say I do a lot of that VO2 work, I keep out a lot of the other stuff. So it's all balance here. You can't do everything all the time. You can't be big numbers in all zones. And by no means should you, if your target is endurance, you shouldn't be necessarily going, well, I should be maximizing, I should have more time in VO2 max in the week compared to what I have in zone 2. It's just not specific, is it? So you got to think about those circumstances. What are the actual components of fitness I need to be working on, or parts of my physiology that are going to be the most critical and important for me. hopefully that answers your question. Let me know in the chat if it does. We'll get back to the question I missed before. This is related to a question asked a while back. Get bored running at zone 2, often run at threshold instead. I know it'll be taxing me more, so a little bit more fatiguing, but am I really robbing myself of performance? For the most part, I really think so. I was having a conversation actually a little bit earlier with an athlete talking about, well, if we change and tweak our zone 2 and just do most of that as a primary throughout the week, then have some really quality high intensity sessions, that more polarized approach can be really, really effective when you're time poor. So I know it's a bit of a struggle and it can be a bit boring. You just got to find ways of making it interesting for yourself. The zone 2 is really, really effective. If you're doing some of that more threshold or getting close to maybe a tempo is probably a better way to put it. If you're doing some tempo stuff as a race specific preparation, that's okay, because it's leaning into, well, what am I actually trying to train for here, and be very specific to the event output I want to have. If you're training generally and we're in like a base phase, then like you're just pushing too hard, you're going to blow yourself up, particularly if you're trying to do really high intensity VO2 stuff throughout the week. And also it's the type of thing that, because it is more taxing and more fatiguing, you're going to get into those quality sessions throughout the week, your interval sessions, your high intensity stuff, those dedicated where you're going hard and having a short recovery, or going hard and having an equal recovery. You're going to rob yourself of a bit of time there, because you're probably coming into that a lot more fatigued than what you should be, because you've worked too hard over that distance in the longer stuff. So keeping it long and slow can be tough. I mean, things that I do, I'll go and run instead of on the same track. I'll just change direction. I'll head out the normal way I go, and then instead of turning right, I'll turn left. Yes, it might take me on a very different run because it's more undulating one way than another. There's a big hill on one side, there's not on the other. That's okay. I just adjust for that, but it changes up the environment. Particularly in Melbourne, we're able to go a little bit further. 25k radius is now the thing. Next week, it's gone. If you can move around, drive to somewhere if you really have to. I know it's not necessarily the most practical, but drive to somewhere, park the car, run around a big park or national park, or go running down the beach if you don't live near the beach. Those types of things can really just sort of make it a bit more interesting. You've got things to look at. Try some trail running if you're normally running on roads. I sometimes head down the beach, and instead of heading down the concrete path, I'll head down the trail. It's a little bit of a different stimulus, and maybe I can't hold the same pace, but I get the same heart rate output, and it keeps that zone 2 a bit more interesting as well. So these things to try and make it a bit more tolerable. I tend to run with music. If you don't like running with music, obviously that's a different story. But if you want to try it, or listen to a podcast, I know some people do that. Listen to something that's a little bit easy, like it's not taxing on the brain. It's just kind of like people talking rubbish. Those types of things can be good to sort of make it a bit more interesting as well. For the most part, keeping it zone 2 is going to be ideal. If you're pushing up threshold, you're going to be blowing yourself up pretty quick over the course of a training block, if that's what all your long runs are up at threshold, of course, and tempo. It's more then coming down to just the loading in the week. Make sure you have balance everywhere is also the sort of final point. So yeah, try to keep it zone 2, and I know it's tough. No one likes going out and doing big runs and at a slow pace, particularly when a lot of us like to go fast in our performance, but it is a part that is going to be pretty important for our overall training and overall preparation. Sort of follow up to that, I feel like I'm getting enough recovery after the long run. So yeah, if you feel like you're getting enough recovery post run, that's okay, but think about how much better you might feel if you drop the intensity a little bit more as well. Plus, the intensity drops and keeps it a genuine zone 2, we're more likely to get those great aerobic adaptations in terms of usage of oxygen. Tap a bit more into that delay of the tapping into too much carbohydrate use, and really use a little bit more fats at those lower intensities, which can help from a metabolic aspect a bit as well. All of these things you're missing out on if you're pushing too hard, is the reality of it. So yeah, keeping it long and slow is the way to go. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but the reality is that's kind of what you need to do. You kind of have to just put up with it, unfortunately, because it is a quality training stimulus, and it's a key part of what we do as endurance athletes as a whole. Moving into our next question. Great questions coming through tonight. Some really interesting discussion and some different questions to what we've had before. And really thank everyone for jumping in. The people who've jumped in, week out, and asking some very different questions. Really interesting to see some of the things you're thinking about throughout the week. As well. So definitely enjoy some of these interesting conversations that are coming through, and hopefully I'm helping you guys out understand and sort of answer these questions along the way. Moving into our next one, what do you think of zone 3? So 80 to 87% of VO2 max training and intervals, beneficial or not? 80 to 87. Follow up to this. A lot of pro skiers are doing a lot of that type of training. 80 to 87 really for most people is going to be borderline threshold, maybe sub threshold. The average person, I'd probably argue about 85% of VO2 max to 90% of VO2 max is where their lactate threshold, or functional threshold, anaerobic threshold, whatever you want to call it, sits. The really well trained athletes for their size engine, 90 to 95% of VO2 max is their threshold. So this zone, as a percentage of VO2 max, would become more of a sub threshold or getting close to tempo, like top end tempo, more sub threshold. For the lesser trained athlete who might have a threshold at 75 to 80% of VO2 max, or maybe 80 to 85, this is going to be bang on threshold. So already you can see that the stimulus is very different. So it needs to be applied to the individual circumstance and understand where does this 80 to 87% fit for the individual. If I'm going to go through those three scenarios, if 80 to 87% of VO2 max is bang on threshold or close to, that type of training is really, really effective for boosting our lactate threshold, boosting the percentage at which we can work at for 45 to 60 minutes. That is incredibly useful. That's the age-old tested method of improving our performance, particularly when we've got a circumstance, and we had the question last week about I'm not improving my VO2 max, but I'm getting faster in my events like 5K, 10K, half marathon. Why is that the case? Well, your threshold's improving as a percentage of VO2 max. So working at threshold, just above, and at threshold for some sort of, when I say moderate length, above threshold for things like 5 minutes or less, at threshold for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then longer than 10 minutes, you would probably just do sub threshold a little bit more, but still faster than tempo. So kind of, if you get where I'm going there, it's like making these clear distinctions. It might be like 95% of FTP, for example, is more of a sub threshold. Those types of things are really, really beneficial. If your threshold is actually at 95% of VO2 max, 80 to 87 might be closer to tempo. In which case, or like top end of tempo, in which case, yeah, beneficial, but probably not as beneficial if we were to push right up to 90% of VO2 max. We just got to work out where it sits for you. If this is a well above threshold, though, your threshold's at like 75 to 80% or 80 to 85% on the lower end. If it's 80 to 85%, again, beneficial because it's at threshold and above threshold, so that's useful. If you're well above, you start to get close to VO2 max, so then it's it's going to be a different stimulus, but again, going to be beneficial. So really, my key to answering this question is basically where does this 80 to 87% fit in relation to where your threshold is, as a percentage of VO2 max, because we have that variability of where people's thresholds fit. And that's the bonus of things like lab testing, understanding exactly where's my VO2 max occur and where does my threshold occur as a relation to that. Then applying, okay, this 80 to 87% is going to cover most bases for most people in terms of threshold, but where do I actually sit in that spectrum? That's why I kind of don't like strict definitions of training zones. And I talk about this a lot, training zones being like, well, zone 3 has to be 80 to 87% of VO2 max. Well, no, because like I said, there's variability on where threshold sits. So you're getting a very different stimulus depending on where you are. 95% of VO2 max, for example, though, if we're talking about trying to improve VO2 max, well, 95% isn't going to be variable because we know where VO2 max is. As long as you've tested it, we just take 5% off that and we're in the right spot. But when we're talking like 95% and above is what we're then looking at. So then there's no real upper limit when we're talking about some of those VO2 max sessions, because we just change the variables around the session of work to rest ratios, length of interval, etc. When we're talking about like 80 to 87%, it's like, is it threshold? Is it more tempo? Is it sub threshold? Those types of things are difficult to then gauge. But once we can gauge that, we're well and truly on the way. And I think, yeah, in that area, for the most part, for most people, probably rambled a bit here, but for the most part, it is going to be reasonably beneficial because it's basically threshold training. And that's the the mainstay of endurance performance, isn't it? For years and years and years, threshold has been, like, training at and around threshold has been really, really useful. It will be and continue to be until the human body evolves enough where maybe there's another way of getting that significant gain in our performance. It's going to be a while before we see that happen, because evolution doesn't happen that quickly, but it's the type of thing that definitely can be beneficial, but we need context to the scenario. Coming into, don't be sorry for asking so many questions. You're absolutely killing it tonight. And as I said before, for anyone who's just joined us in the last little while, you'll notice next to Aaron here on the chat in the right hand side, and if I screen share what you can see over here, if I can get it working, there we go. Over here on the right hand side, you'll see Aaron's got a little badge next to his name, which identifies he is one of our members. We've just announced that on the channel, that we do have channel memberships. Just click the join button down below if you do want to support the channel a little bit more than just subscribing and sharing and commenting and joining these live streams and asking you questions. If you do want to make a little bit of a donation to the channel and keep supporting the channel, hit the join button down there. For less than a coffee a month, you can be part of Team NJ Sports Science. Get a little badge next to your name to identify you in chat, and make it easier for me to see your questions, and your questions will actually stand out to me when I'm looking at them on the screen in front of me. In terms of this next question, though, I normally run fasted provided I don't bonk. Is this okay? I would normally do this up to 90 minutes if I'm running easy tempo. If you're going to fast before sessions, the general rule is do them on your long slow. Why is this the case? Because as I mentioned before, when we were talking about pushing too hard in zone 2 sessions, when we work in a zone 2, and that is long, slow, base aerobic, for those of you who might use different training zone definitions, the long, slow running, you can typically do faster because it's at an intensity less than about 75% of VO2 max for the most part, for most people. You're typically spending a lot of time down there. In which case, below that intensity for the majority of the population is going to be heavily fat oxidation. So we're using a lot of fat for fuel. So you don't actually need the carbohydrates in. So having running fasted, and fasted meaning minimal carbohydrate intake prior, is going to be okay because your major fuel source is going to be fat. We're at a low enough intensity where we can sustain that as well, and you're not necessarily going to bonk as such. Increase the intensity too much though, the average person's above sort of 70% is going to start to struggle. If you're at 75% of your VO2 max, top end of zone 2, really pushing the borderline of that aerobic into tempo, that's where you're probably going to find after about 90 minutes you start to crash, because we're going to have a little bit more influence of the glycolysis process, having a little bit more of that contribution of carbohydrates as a fuel source. So that's where fasted is okay for the really long, slow, and keeping it nice and easy. When you start to move up to tempo, having some carbs in is going to be useful to help you prevent that bonking at 90 minutes. If you have to go longer than that, if you're shorter than 90 minutes, you can probably get away with it. As you said, if you're doing high intensity intervals, try not to do them fasted. It's a real struggle. Some of you might have tried it, but it really is going to inhibit that process, because as we go up towards things like threshold, and if you're going above threshold in particular, VO2 max sets, that's where it's basically 100% carbohydrate utilization at those intensities, because we can't generate energy fast enough from using fat as a fuel source. We need carbs to be able to do it. There's a much greater anaerobic contribution to help sustain as well. Those parts are also going to be the contributors to why you would crash a lot harder if you tried to fast before, or you just can't get up to a high enough intensity as you would need to in those types of sessions. So fasting, long story short, fasting in long slow is good. Fasting in tempo is kind of like, you might get there, but a little bit of carbs is not going to hurt. Fasting at high intensity, interval training, and threshold above, do not recommend, because it's really hard to maintain your quality, is the simple answer. Gavin, thank you so much for becoming a member. Welcome to Team NJ Sports Science. Thank you for supporting the channel. Big shout out. You'll get your little badge to be able to wear next to your name in the chat. It also shows up in the YouTube comments as well. So when you comment on a video, everyone on the channel is going to be able to see who our members are, and see who is really enjoying the content and supporting the channel. Some of our more active members or active people in the community are starting to become our members as well. So people are going to start to see those little icons, and I'm sure a couple of you guys who have joined on as members are going to make a few people a little bit jealous when they look at the chat and they see you've got a little thing next to your name, and it's going to start changing color. As I said, start out with green, and we do work our way through. After a couple of months, it's going to move to pink, yellow, red, purple, and then if you can get it all the way up to the purple's 12 months, remember, for a full year. If we can get anyone up to the blue, that'd be awesome. But it's going to be a little bit of an ask to get to the blue, and got to stick with this for quite a while. So looking forward to seeing who can be the first person. I think it's going to be a race between Gavin and Aaron at the moment for who's going to get to the blue icon first. But both of you guys, really, really appreciate you joining as members of the channel, and thank you for supporting everything we are doing here. Moving into our next question from another Will. Hi, Nick. For a triathlete focusing on, for example, threshold running, should they also train threshold for bike, or the opposite? And should we be training something different on the bike? Really good one. We actually had a question. I had a question coming through. I can't remember if I talked about it last week or if I talked about it just in a direct message. I know I spoke about this recently, but it is something that, can we train VO2? Actually, I think I did a video on it. Can we train VO2 and threshold at the same time, or should we split them up? And it comes down to, well, what is our training? What is our training, I guess, status primarily? Are we that top end 1% elite that needs a lot of variability in our training? And what I mean by variability is, like, we need to do VO2 one day, and then the next day we need to be doing some more threshold and some zone 2. We're going to mix up our training a lot more because we're looking at 1% changes or less than 1%. A little bit of a push here is going to help this session just bump up a little bit. And it's like anything. You learn something enough. You learn a skill. I'm just trying to look around the room here. If you catching a ball, when you learn to catch a ball or ride a bike, I think I described the process of riding a bike, but if you learn to catch a ball, you start with, well, I'm going to catch it 2 hands, and the ball's only coming a pretty low, slow distance, and it's not going too high. Then we might start to challenge you once you get better at it. So we start to throw it higher, and we start to throw it left and right. Then we start to challenge you by, well, you can only catch it with 1 hand now. These little challenges along the way is what allows us to continue to progress and get better and better and better at the skill. For the elite athlete, mixing up what they're doing, so they might be doing some threshold for running, and then their bike is more VO2 focused. These little subtleties are what helps continuing to challenge in that 1%. We have what's called a daily undulating, more undulating model of periodization, so planning the training to be able to cater for that need for that increased variability, or you could almost call it strategic periodization. We're manipulating things throughout the week on a very focused in scale, like week by week scale. We're manipulating things rather than sort of month at a time or maybe 6 weeks at a time. For everyone who's not elite, amateurs, top end amateurs, for the most part, unless you've got that little 1% to gain and nothing more, I tend to say, if you're focusing on threshold for running, threshold on the bike is the way to go as well. If you're focusing on VO2 for running, VO2 on the bike is the way to go as well. Or like, keep them the same. And what we fall into here is more phase potentiation. So each block of training, whether it's a 4-week block, 6-week block, 12-week block, whatever, we then have these phases where we're deliberately targeting all of our training around one component. And we can look at this as the traditional thing in endurance is we have a base phase. So base is typically a large amount of zone 2 or aerobic type work across all your sports. So for a triathlete, it's going to be swim, bike, and run. All of your sports are going to have a large zone 2 focus or a base aerobic focus, but then also we might have some VO2 max focus, because that's all collectively working together to improve our ability to use oxygen at a fastest rate, so VO2, but then also our capacity or our muscular endurance at the low end as well. We move into a build phase or a race specific phase. That starts to change. We maintain some of that base aerobic capacity, the long, slow type stuff, and we substitute out the VO2 for our threshold, because that's going to get more race specific, tune up the engine. We've built the engine size in the base phase, then we insert the cylinders and tune it up in the race specific. That works better because it gives us more time to adapt. Most part, amateur athletes are at the point where they're learning to catch the ball for the first time, or they're learning to catch the ball from a height. Elite athletes are learning to catch the ball one-handed, facing the wrong way and with their eyes closed. So that variation in those simple things, they need more stimulus to get those little bit of a gain. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit there, and you can, I guess, relate to some of those scenarios I've given in terms of how that might apply to your situation. For the most part, keeping your focus on the run and the bike is going to be the better way to go, purely from the fact that, like, you're just going to get more time at that same equivalent stimulus, so that type of adaptation improves. Don't get me wrong, running for threshold, if you want to improve your threshold, running, but you want to improve other things on the bike, yeah, you can argue the specificity point of view, but the adaptation from a physiological perspective, if you improve threshold on the run and then you improve threshold on the bike as well, the work you've done on the bike is going to indirectly help you on the run and vice versa. Whereas if you're targeting two different things, you're not going to get those extra, that extra set of stimulus as you would if you're doing the same thing in the week, or having the same focus across those two sports. So let me know in the chat there, Will, if that's covered your question and answered it in terms of where you're sort of going. I tend to, for the most part, blocks and keeping it the same is the best way to go. Then when we move into a different phase of our training, we're targeting a different component, then we shift together. All the sports are targeting the same physiological qualities at the same time. Also keeps it really simple. You know, when you're going out in the training week, I'm targeting this quality throughout this block of training, or I'm targeting this other quality. Keeps it really, really simple. But particularly for athletes who just kind of want to go out and train and enjoy the process, they're very clear on what their goals are. Can also be a good motivating factor as well. Great to have so many questions. We're just about to tick over the hour mark, so if anyone does want to throw in some last minute questions before we do finish up tonight, really appreciate your jumping on. As always, continue to share and subscribe to the channel. Keep supporting what we are doing. Really appreciate you joining on for these live streams each week. For those who have been here each week, for maybe some of our new viewers or new people to the channel, new people to the live stream, welcome if you are watching for the first time. Really appreciate you jumping in and asking questions, getting involved. Pretty much everyone who's jumped in the chat tonight. I'm seeing a whole bunch of different names and counting the numbers of how many people are watching, and we're starting to we're pretty much on par of everyone's commented, which is awesome. So great to see everyone jumping in and getting involved in the discussion. If we do have any other questions coming through, I've just seen, Will, you've just said makes sense. Perfect. Thanks for sending the question through. Glad to be able to cover it and sort of give you my thoughts and ideas on it. As I was saying, though, if we do have any other questions, happy to take them now. Otherwise, if we don't have anything come through in the next couple of minutes or so, we might wrap it up there for tonight because we've already been going for an hour. As always, though, the full replay will be up on the channel. Post this immediately afterwards. I just got to do a few little back-end things and admin to then get it up and working. But full replay is always available. So if you do miss anything and you want to watch it back, you can skip through to the points that you want to rewatch again, things like that. And I try to get out a highlights video of all the best questions or some of the best discussion points, cut it together so it's a little bit shorter and sort of try to keep it to 10, 20 minutes, depending on how long our live stream goes. So it's a little bit easier for you guys to watch as well if you do happen to miss the full version of the live stream. Whichever way you prefer to do it. Happy to continue to make those and try to help those who can't always make it, because I know people are busy, people are going back to work, things like that. You might not be able to get here live. That's okay. If you do want to send through, and I'll bring my details up on the screen because I've created a new little thing in the bottom corner here. If you do want to send through your questions and you can't make a live stream, head over to NJ_sportscience on Instagram. Ask your questions in direct message. I'll always respond to it when I can. Make sure that you get a written response, but then also bring it up in the live stream for others to talk about later. We had Caleb before talking about stride power meters. He sent me a message earlier today, brought it up again on the live stream. We can talk about it here. Great way of getting your question answered regardless. Make sure you are heading over and subscribing to this channel. If you want to join as a member, thanks to the guys who've joined tonight as well. Continue to share, continue to support the channel in whatever way you feel like you can. Absolutely loving the support regardless. So thanks for jumping on board and helping to grow this great community. We've got a couple of questions that we've got coming through here. Let's have a look. Dr. I'm going to butcher this name, Sailor, apologies if I got that one wrong, says that there's not much benefit at training more than 92% VO2. I'm not too familiar with who you're referring to there. I strongly disagree, and the research strongly disagrees. I don't know what the context of maybe that comment is about in terms of the type of athletes that they are recommending not training above 92% VO2. I very strongly disagree. And we could go through the research for hours showing you the benefit of the really high intensity stuff at 100 to 110, even 120% of VO2 max. Paper after paper after paper after paper supports the use of high intensity interval training for boosting that top end. Otherwise, how are you going to move the top end of your VO2 if you don't get time and stimulus up there? It's like anything. If you did it, like, let's say if we flip that question around and said, let's dump out all of our base training. Well, there goes all of our muscular endurance in the week. So now we're not going to be any good at many different types of endurance events because we don't have the muscular endurance of legs. I think it's a bit sort of interesting on that. And I've just noticed that Caleb is saying, oh, yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense in terms of, I recognize Stephen at the front of the name now. The guy who published Polarized Training, which is interesting because why would the method behind Polarized Training is you have very low and very high intensity. It's interesting to kind of limit that at 92% rather than going up to 95 and 100% of VO2. That would be even more polarized again. It kind of then countered, I guess, sort of counters his own argument or contradicts his own argument is the word I'm going for. Interesting thought though. Like I'm happy to, like if anyone wants to send through any more of some of that info, Baker, if you've got some of that that information and those comments or commentary about not going more than 92% VO2, would really love to hear it. Cal was saying we're sort of working through this as we can because it's something that I haven't heard that comment, so I'm interested to sort of go through this and have this back and forth that we're having now in regards to heart rate zones, not power zones. That would make a little bit more sense. Yeah, okay. His research is mainly about heart rate. That makes a little bit more sense in terms of context because working at 95% of your VO2 max in terms of power is very different to working at 92% or more of your heart rate max. I would still argue, though, that going up to close to 100% of heart rate max in small bursts is still useful. Which one do we go by? Heart rate zone or power zone? I use a mix to answer that question there about which one do we use. Should we use heart rate or should we use power zone? I use a mix depending on the type of the session. Typically, the longer and slower you go, the more I lean to heart rate, better indicator. The shorter and faster you go, the more I lean to power when we're talking about cycling because we take out things like aerodynamics and all of those aspects and we get a physiological stimulus. But also, if you're talking about a short interval, like a 2-minute interval, your heart rate takes a bit of time to get up there, whereas power is like 300 watts from the beginning. That's also where we get a bit more time at the stimulus. I think that clears. I think we're maybe all on the same page now in terms of above 92% of heart rate max would typically be a very different thing to maybe what 95% of power at VO2 max would be. It's obviously going to be a little bit sort of different there, and I can understand a little bit more of that conversation of why you wouldn't want to go above the 92% heart rate rather than percentage VO2 because they're not directly aligned. That's something we have to consider in this conversation is that 100% heart rate max is not the same as 100% VO2 max. They're different. They're offset. 100% heart rate max would sit here and 100% VO2 max would sit sort of there. They're close, but they're not going to be fully accurate because I could go and sprint. I could jump on the bike right now. I'm not going to, but sprint for 30 seconds as hard and as fast as I can, and I'll get to a really quick heart rate max. But most of that's anaerobic, yeah, because the body's trying to catch up and distribute oxygen and pump blood around. Whereas VO2 max, I can't get my heart rate as high because that VO2 max is the max amount of oxygen uptake rather than just what can my heart rate get to. Because the heart rate's going to continue to come up as long as I'm continuing to increase the intensity. Because it's trying to catch up and deliver oxygen, but it can't necessarily. So I think we've kind of summarized that pretty nicely in terms of where we're sort of heading with that. But yeah, if anyone does have any direct links to some of these articles that are talking about some of that, and if it does cross over with VO2, I'd be interested to hear it. Always continuing to learn myself. So if there's something that you've read and you want something clarified, you've read it, you thought it was interesting, always happy to send it through. Send it through to Instagram, email, whatever way is easiest to get in contact. Always keen to have a read and look at some of the research because I'm not obviously by myself going to be able to find everything that's written. It's very easy to miss things that come through at a particular hour of the day and someone else is looking at it on social media or researching it. The more we can share stuff back and forth, doesn't just have to be me sitting here talking all the time. If someone wants to bring an article and we can talk through it, absolutely. Send something through. I'm happy to have that conversation. Caleb's also said something that kind of got caught up in that conversation, getting fitted by Ken next week. So pumped for that. Thought I'd put it out there. Absolutely. I'd be excited to go see him. I've got an athlete that I've been coaching for a little while who's getting his road bike set up from Ken. He got his time trial bike set up about 18 months ago. He's getting his road bike set up and sort of stealing a few little ideas because we've got the same road bike now. We've got a Focus, both got Focuses, Alco Maxes, and they're both the same same frame size and geometry, and we both have very similar needs. So I'm going to steal a few ideas off him. But yeah, definitely jealous that you're heading in and seeing Ken at Adaptive HP. For those of you who are based again in Melbourne, he's the go-to for a bike fit perspective. I talked about Paul McKinnon, the balance runner, for running before. But if you're based in Melbourne, he's the Ken at Adaptive HP is the go-to. He's also the founder and the owner of Sync Ergonomics. If anyone's seen the extensions, the aero extensions, arm cups, the wedges, and all the front end stuff, I've actually got the arm cups on my time trial bike. Really, really comfortable front end setup. Unbelievable. He's just a genius in that space in terms of aero and comfort, and the combination of both for triathletes, for road cyclists, for time trialists, the works. Comes from again an interesting sort of perspective on the whole thing rather than that traditional sort of route. So definitely something to go consider. And as I said before, bike fit is a key component of making sure your performance and your injury prevention is up there. Coming back to our conversation before, I'm going to go look up, Kale's just said there's a TED Talk talking about some of that polarized stuff. So yeah, good option for everyone to go check out the TED Talk. I'll bring up his name again. I assume if we just type in Steven Silas, am I saying that correctly? Siler. We type in his name and TED Talk into YouTube once we're done here, and we should be able to find it. I might go have a bit of a watch of that a little bit later on and sort of get a bit more perspective on this part of the conversation that we're heading down. Seen them, but coming back to the zones type of thing, seen them but confused. 92% of VO2 max is then threshold, but Nick is saying go higher. So yeah, so in terms of what we're talking about there, when we talk about percentage of VO2 max, so 100% of VO2 max. Hopefully, I'm picking up on where you're going with this. Let me know if I'm not. 100% of VO2 max is where the maximum amount of oxygen we can take in transport utilize sits. To be able to improve that, a minimum stimulus of 95% of VO2 max is where we need to get to be able to start to get that stimulus at the top end. So anything 95% or above. So you can go 95%, you can go 100% of VO2 max, you go 105% of VO2 max, you go 110%, 120% of VO2 max. All of these are going to be great for improving your maximal rate of oxygen consumption. How quickly can we use oxygen consumption? How much aerobic energy in that short period of time can we generate? Threshold for some people can be as high as 95% of VO2 max is what I was talking about before. That is really the cap, because threshold is the theoretical intensity we can sit on for 45 to an hour, and really highly trained athletes can obviously use the most out of their endurance engine. So their VO2 max is here and their threshold is really close. Threshold can't exceed VO2 max. So it's going to be 95. It needs a buffer. You wouldn't really ever see someone above 95% of VO2 max as their threshold. Like, there's just not enough physiological space, if that makes sense. Most people sit below that, but 95% is sort of the limit. So going above threshold is going to be a good training stimulus, particularly for that type of athlete, because we need that to maybe boost up their FTP like 1 or 2%, very, very small amounts. But for the typical athlete whose threshold sits at 85% of VO2 max, down here, training above threshold and above 92% of VO2 max, well above threshold, is going to help to drag that up as well. But also, when we talk about 95% of VO2 max and above, and I'm talking about a lot of numbers here, that helps to push the top end out. So if I start again, VO2 max here, thresholds here, you can't exceed VO2 max with threshold. VO2 max has to move first. So 95% of VO2 max and above is going to help move the top, move the ceiling, move the size of the engine, whatever you want to call it. If your threshold's more down here, you can work at 92% of VO2 max, 95% of VO2 max, things like that, above threshold or at threshold, and that's going to help drag this up until we can't move it anymore, until we have to then move the top end of the engine as well. Hopefully these little hand gestures I'm doing are making a little bit more sense to you. Let me know in the chat there. I want to sort of make sure that I've clarified that for you before I jump off, or if we need to continue the conversation, let me know, get in contact, and we can maybe set up a time to have a one-on-one to talk through that a little bit more if you are still a bit confused, because it can be a bit difficult to get your head around sometimes, when we're talking about different terms and different training zones and methodologies behind setting up the percentages and things like that. I'm just talking purely just like based on where VO2 max is as like 100%, etc. Where do things fall in relation to that is always much more simple way to look at it. And it's also standardized too, because then we can generally apply that reasonably well across multiple people, because then it's easily adjusted for their ability. 95% for one person could be 300 watts, 95% for another person could be 385 watts. Could be 285 watts. If you're someone like me and not a great cyclist, it's 285. But those percentages then move with the person. So that's why I like using them rather than percentage of heart rate. Heart rate's a lot more variable because some people have really high heart rate, some people have really low. Hopefully that cleared it up. Let me know in the chat. Just a quick comment, maybe a thumbs up or a yes or a no. And we can sort of continue to work through it if we need to. Just ticked over 70 minutes. If there are any other questions, I know there's a few of us still in here. Let me know. Send them through. We can quickly wrap up with sort of one or two more. Otherwise, if there aren't any questions that come through in the next minute or so, I might wrap it up there because we have gotten through a lot so far. Really appreciate it. Again, all of you jumping on tonight and joining the conversation. Some great discussion going on and great questions as always. Be sure to look out for the replay. The full replay is going to be up on the channel tonight. So if you have missed it and you're jumping in now or you want to watch the stuff that you missed at the beginning, it will be there. If you are watching on the replay, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Melbourne time is when we're going live each week. Be sure to jump in and get involved in the live stream. Get your questions answered. If you can't, jump across to Instagram, bottom corner of the screen here, just over here. You can go check out at NJ_sportscience. Send me a direct message, give me a follow, and make sure you get your question through there. If you can't meet us on the live stream here, thank you again to the guys who've jumped on and joined Team NJ Sports Science as a member. I'll show it one more time before we do finish up, but heading over to clicking this join button underneath here. You should be able to do this on your phones as well as on laptops as well, but clicking the join button opens up the ability to join Team NJ Sports Science. Keep tripping over my words tonight. For less than the price of a coffee a month, you can help support the channel. All the money goes back into developing this channel and also taking a bit of pressure off me to be able to spend the time making the videos and jumping on these live streams outside of my existing working commitments too. So I really do appreciate it. You can get some of these little badges next to your name. The longer you remember, the cooler the color. I've saved blue for the end because blue is one of my favorite colors. So if you're with us for a long period of time, you get the best badges at the top: red, purple, and blue. And as you are a member for a longer period of time, you move through these badges and they'll show up in the chat. As you'll see, if you scroll back through the chat, you'll see them pop up next to people's names here. You can see the little badges comes up in comments, so everyone knows that you're a member of the team. And I'm also going to be working towards some more exclusive content for our members in the future. If you do join up, again, very small contribution goes a long way to help keeping this channel running and to help get the best info and the best content out to you guys as well. So really appreciate if you are keen on joining that. Otherwise, share and subscribe as always. Keep commenting, keep sending your questions through, keep engaging on Instagram. All of these things are also great ways to support the channel because I know not everyone might not be able to contribute from a financial perspective, but if you want to contribute by sharing the channel to a bunch of your friends, posting it on social media, that also is a great way to help support, and I really do appreciate that just as much. So by no means is it a necessity, but would really appreciate it regardless. No more questions coming through, so I think we might end it there, and a few people starting to jump out as well. Thanks again for jumping on tonight. Really appreciate it, as always. Looking forward to next week's live stream and a couple of videos coming before the weekend, so keep an eye out for them. As always, happy to keep in touch and keep in contact. Check out all the other social medias. I'll leave them up on this page that is about to come up soon when we end, but thanks for joining us tonight, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.